And if we take a minute to think about just the fabulous accomplishments of the environmental movement. You know, in its first decade or so, it passed about a dozen laws that have left our air cleaner, our water cleaner, our soil less contaminated, that have saved premature deaths and preventable illnesses, that have made our cars less polluting. It took a while for the environmental movement that began in the 70s to understand and take on environmental justice, the disparate impact of environmental contamination on poor and better off people, and on blacks, Latinos, and other peoples of color, and on whites. But beginning in the 80s at Love Canal and in Warren, North Carolina, and here in New York City, many groups came up that put environmental justice at the front and center of the environmental movement. And now, you know, on the eve of the 45th birthday, it's hard to have a balanced view of both the accomplishments of the environmental movement and where work still needs to be done, because there are also still huge environmental challenges facing us, and particularly global ones related to climate change and human-induced global warming, but also others, including the continuing disparate impact of environmental pollution on different groups of people, both here in New York City in the United States and around the world. And I'm hoping that a theme of our talk today and in the months to come can be, what can we learn from the environmental movement so that we can copy its successes and avoid its failures? And when the food justice movement is 45 years old, what can we point to say, we've accomplished this, we've saved this many lives, we've prevented this many illnesses? And what do we need to do today, tomorrow, next year, in the next decade? And I wanted to, again, before introducing Barbara, say that it is because of the food justice movement here in New York City that there is a food policy coordinator and an office of food policy in the mayor's office. That is the accomplishment of the people in this room and the many others who did that. Tomorrow, and Barbara will be talking a little bit about the new Plan New York City that's being released, PlaNYC, being released tomorrow. That report will include a much more substantial food section. And it's because of the food justice movement and the people in this room and the other people working with us that that is on the agenda. And we have a mayor and a city council committed to making equity a priority. And part of the reason for that is the food justice movement put food equity on the policy agenda through the mayoral forum that many people in this room helped to organize, and through the events in the campaign. And the fact that there's a person sitting in City Hall who thinks about food equity is an accomplishment of the food justice movement. But those accomplishments aren't enough. And so let's be sure that we leave today thinking about the next 5 years and the next 10 years and what we want to be able to appoint to.
I've had a lot of questions over and over about how it is that I'm actually in this role, because I don't necessarily come from the food world as defined, but all the continuity there is really, it's about justice. And so I feel very much at home, and I appreciate that people have welcomed me into this community of justice. And I hope that we can and we will do great things together. In this moment where we have a mayor who's very supportive and has the bigger vision around equity and justice. And speaking of environmental justice, the environmental movement. So it's sort of like, how do we have a city that takes into account the fact that so many people have so much human impact on the environment in New York, and what are we going to do to mitigate that and recognize that impact and mitigate that impact? What kind of practices does the city need to engage in going forward? And this this was the moment when I learned for the first time, I didn't understand this, that actually, of course, in New York City, it's not really cars, because I'm from that Cleveland place, right? It's not the cars, it's actually the buildings that are emitting so much harmful, are doing so much harm. And so how do we heat and cool buildings differently and so on and so forth. So there were a set of recommendations around that. And these are not merely recommendations, there are indicators associated with them, and we have to track the indicators to see if we're making progress. And we report annually to the public. This is all on the web. We don't send you a letter to your home, so you have to actually go online, but it's all there. We're following this as you should. And then Sandy hit. And there was a supplement that was actually produced. It was, relatively speaking, it didn't have the heft of the other ones in terms of actual ounces, but it was a short and very, I was going to say sweet, it's certainly a potent vision of how we can, as they say in resiliency, harden the city. So it's a lot about coastal protection and what do we do about accessing liquid fuels, which are better known as gasoline in most cases, where when the city is, as we go forward, not necessarily for a catastrophe, although there was that too, but also just because the seas are rising, we're building parks that may be underwater, and what do we do about that? The focus in this plan is all of the above, right? Plus equity. So this is kind of and I want you to know this is a very big deal. Because when you put in what we call an equity lens into the mix, along with sustainability, along with resiliency, and along with growth as lenses, you automatically, from a government perspective, engage twice as many agencies. So instead of the same 20 or 30 agencies that are working on DOT, I'm sorry, I'm a human services person. I love it's all about humans, right? But agencies that deal on a regular basis with people, the challenges of preventing homelessness, for example, were not in the mix in the previous conversations that we had about PlaNYC. And so a lot of the entities, the agencies that I work with most closely, by the way, there are 2 of us in my office, but I do think that there are actually, we have at least 20 staff, if not more, because we work with very, very closely with the Department of Health, Economic Development, Human Resources Administration, Department of Education. Now, those are all people, there's kind of a web of us, so think of us as a mighty web. And it's actually stronger that way, too. Yeah. Nick is right. I would not be able to get the leverage that I have in those conversations if you hadn't been making some noise. It's absolutely true. I depend on this. I depend on your thoughtful research. I depend on your thoughtful advocacy to be able to get anything done and to be able to point to things. We do things called decision memos in the administration, and there's always something called stakeholder analysis. This goes to a question that Devin was asking me before we started about urban gardens. The mayor wants to know, not only what is the policy justification, and the mayor wants to know what the policy justification is, and the mayor wants to know what is the community impact, what are, who is behind this, who is supporting it, who is going to get ticked off. Not that those things are the ultimate reasons for decisions, but it just helps to know that there's support for these things, and it helps me be able to include you in those kinds of conversations. The physical focus of the report means that a lot of the food recommendations, or the food section, is related to sort of physical aspects of food justice, like urban and rural, urban agriculture and our relationship to the regional agriculture. There's stuff about school facilities and school food. There's stuff about food retail in there. We anticipate, and this is also new this time, that there will be community engagement after the report. We did a very short, and we know inadequate version of community engagement by simply doing a survey Did any of you, did you know about the survey? Nah, you didn't even know about the survey, right? So there was a survey that was done, but I think it was very limited. I think the things that came out of it around food would be, I think, things that you all would agree to. And our running joke was, Kathy noticed, right? That they didn't all the stuff about food didn't come in as Kathy N from East Harlem, or Barbara T from, from Borum Hill. I think it didn't happen that way, but there were definitely people who talked about food insecurity who came in to the survey. But what we want to do is to do a broader engagement as we go forward. And I'll be able to say more about that when I know exactly what that's going to look like. There are people who are creating what the reveal I can do here today is to tell you maybe that there's a new name. It's not PlaNYC anymore. Oh! It's going to be called, in the spirit of this administration, it's going to be called One New York City. So it's the One New York City report, and I think you'll appreciate a lot of what you see, and I'll look forward to hearing your reactions to it. I also, when I got asked to do this, also in February, it was around the time that Thomas Forster, who's here today, and I were in conversations with cities around the globe. This is something I never anticipated about this job, but it's a nice part of it, and a very helpful part of it to me, which is that, as you may know, there's an expo, a food expo in Milan, or there's an expo in Milan starting next month, and the focus is on food and sustainability, and food justice, and so forth. And the mayor of Milan was an amazing guy, Mayor Pisapia, came to see Mayor de Blasio back in December, maybe, and asked him if he would be a part of developing an urban food policy pact that would be a global urban food policy pact. And not just Western Europe and North America, but truly a global pact among cities. And so the mayors agreed in Italian that they were going to do this. I want you to know that the mayor's Italian is better than his Spanish. It's kind of, there's a thing where he does Spanish every day for Spanish television, but at the press availabilities, but there's never any Italian television there. I'm always thinking, gosh, that'd be cool. But be that as it may. So we all understood enough to know that we had agreed to do this. And the mayor was really excited about the way that Mayor Pisapia talked about this, because it was like, this is going to be like the Kyoto Accord for food, And isn't it interesting, right, that we're using environmental metaphors to talk about this? And I have found, and again, this is a work in progress, this accord, but I have found that I'm in part of two groups now, I guess I would say. One is food policy advisor people who are in cities around the nation, around the United States, who are in various relationships to their mayors and the city agencies. Some are camped out in their health departments, others are in their offices of long-term sustainability. As far as I know, there's only one, I and maybe one other person report. I report to a deputy, actually report to two deputy mayors, one for health and one for economic development and housing. But, so we're moving up. But, so there's that group. And then I'm always having to make excuses for the fact that I'm from New York City, because it's hard to move things here. It's much bigger than the next nearest city now. Los Angeles is about 6 million people, and we're getting close. We're about 8.5 million, getting closer to 9 every day, and probably we're undercounting. I always like to think that we're actually already at 9 million people. I believe that that's probably true, given the undercounting and given that a lot of people don't participate in the census for some very good reasons. So, so I found it was great to be part of this. It's great to be part of this conversation, because one part of it is there's so many cities around the world that are struggling with some of the same things we are. Everybody around the globe is talking about school food, for example. It's like the first place people go in these conversations. Like, what are you doing in your schools around making sure kids are being fed, right? For me, the most provocative and difficult problem that we have is that, All the numbers say that we have 1.4 million people who are food insecure in New York City. And this is not to relativize problems, although this is about what I'm about to do. You know, we have 60,000 people who are homeless. We do. It's a lot of people. It's crazy. And so many, 2/3 of them are kids, right? And we have a lot of people who are in a lot of jeopardy here in the city. And then we have this sort of chronic, it's like a chronic, I don't know what to call it. It's you know, it's a chronic challenge that the city has. It's an economic challenge. And we are trying all these different things to try to change that reality. But 1.4 million people is the same number of people as live in Philadelphia, right? It means that when you get on the subway in the morning, statistically, you know, 15% of the people who are in the car are food insecure. That's statistically, right? Because we know that that's not happening on certain sections of the F train or certain sections of the 2 train or certain sections of the, you know, if our neighborhood, as it were, is between Brooklyn and the Upper West Side, that's, you know, downtown Brooklyn, the Upper West Side, we're not experiencing that. But we have communities where that is true. And so then, you know, the Bronx, 1 in 4 people. I mean, it's stunning to me. And it really is where food policy starts for us, which is that every time as a food justice movement, we also stand with people who are working for worker justice. That's our movement too. That's why all this movement hopping that I've been doing makes total sense. I don't think of it that, I mean, it makes total sense to me. Every time we do something on sick leave so that people don't lose their jobs. Every time we stand with people who are working on debt and people who are, who are part of the predatory economy, running the predatory economy in this country. Those are our natural allies and friends. And so I think we need to keep that in mind as we're doing this work as well. Another thing we're working on related to food insecurity is preserving the safety net, which is the SNAP program. I am very worried about the SNAP program. I'm worried about this Congress and the SNAP program. I don't think they get it. I think they've forgotten. I think the whole urban-rural coalition is broken down in the Congress, or which sort of SNAP is a product of. There's a lot of conversation about taking SNAP out of the ag bill and out of agriculture and turning it into a block grant. And you know what happens when we turn things into block grant? It becomes welfare reform, 90s style, and that's never good. I do want to say that we still have it. And so one of the things we can do as a city is to normalize SNAP. I think it's sort of thought of as welfare, and it's actually not. I think of it as a work support. Steve Banks, our wonderful commissioner of HRA, who you should have come and talk to at some point, understands it as a work benefit. Almost 1/3 of the people who are benefiting from SNAP in the city right now have jobs. SNAP has become something it wasn't meant to be, which is to make up for the gap between what it costs to live in the city and what people are actually paid. Those wages that are not making up for the wages that are lagging behind cost of living in the city. And so it's absolutely critical to New Yorkers. And then we have a lot of people who could take advantage of SNAP who are actually not doing that. And one of the things people tell us is, that's welfare, I've always made it on my own. This is, or people who are older, who've worked all their lives, don't really want to take advantage of this program. So we have a campaign that we're rolling out today. It's a media campaign that HRA developed. You'll see it. I'm excited that 5 people have decided that they want to be the face of SNAP in New York City, and you're going to see them everywhere. You're not going to be able to escape them. You're going to get to know them and be part of their lives, and they'll become part of yours. You'll see their stories in media, and you'll see them in the subway about the ways in which an opportunity, the circumstances under which SNAP was a very helpful place to be for them, whether they had to leave home because of domestic violence or because their Social Security benefits were not keeping up with their living expenses. And you'll see those stories, and what we're trying to do again is just normalize this and take this out of the stigma, take this program out of some stigma, or idea that this is something wrong or bad or even failing that I have to go and get SNAP benefits. It's also easier now to get SNAP benefits. More and more of this is going to be online. If you're curious about more details about that, I'm happy to talk about it.